Thank you, Dr. Lisa, for such a kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. Did you have a good evening? I know some of us had a little late party. It was such a delightful and hospitable environment that I'm just so grateful to be with you. And so we'll carry on to what was the 3 EAR? Do you remember? Elements of life, animals in the Bible, rhythms of life. Wonderful. So today we're gonna appreciate the tree of life. And I'm just admiring this chapel space, and especially those symbols that are made of wood, which is coming from the very tree that sustains. So you are already practicing the beautiful concept and the symbol and the presence of the tree of life. Yes, so the fourth lens for ecological preaching starts with tree of life, that foregrounds a symbol that appears at the very beginning, at the very end of the Bible, when you remember, right? The tree of knowledge in the Genesis and the tree of life at the Revelation. So its symbolic bookends for the sacred text is the reminder of our ecological roots and the branches that knit the whole biblical story together. Gail Ramshaw, a Lutheran theologian, notes in her book, Treasures Old and New, that trees appear in all religions, cultures, and narratives worldwide as one of the most prominent images. Many cultures and religions use the image of the tree to symbolize wholeness in the cosmos, in the nation, in the community, in the very individual person. As a scholar of religion who is interested in religious language, Ramshaw shares her personal story about caring for living trees in another book she wrote, entitled Under the Tree of Life. That's what you see. So when I read her own personal affiliation with the tree, I want you to think about your own association with a tree. She said, I came to care for living trees because I first cared for the tree of life. That metaphor pulled me into the matter. The images of mystical, magical, and physically extraordinary trees in the ark in our house, in the museums I visit, in the religions I study, finally focused my own attention on the trees in our yard, the trees by the Maine coast, the rainforest upon which our life depends. Such is the power of metaphor to make us see newly. The metaphor had accomplished its miracle. It transmogrified the commonplace into the splendid. The tree of life is a central biblical image. I don't have to say on and on, right? It is really, but to the point of the cross of Jesus in the liturgical season that we are going through, Christ. And the symbol, that cross, is a paradox, right? Namely, by dying, Jesus saves. But for the sake of God's recreation and the healing of the world, Jesus died on a cross. In Revelation, John of Patmos explicitly described the tree of life for the healing of nations. It's a plural. We have to make that very clear in today's context. The Ark of Bible, which began with a tree, ends with a tree. So another person is in the book, Matthew Sleed, who underlined everything the Bible has to say about trees, had this epiphany. He said, God has an astonishing fondness of trees. Other than God and people and the Bible mentions tree, more than any other living thing. And he's actually a medical doctor, and he's a lay, kind of parishioner of the church. And he was really cynical about Christianity because he's in his scientific, medical kind of knowledge that religion is so kind of archaic, until he read and realized about the prominence of the trees in the Bible and how that was profoundly shifted his understanding of faith. So he wrote that book. It's very personal, accessible, so if you want to read through with your congregation and study about the trees, not so much about as a botanist, but as a kind of faith-rooted kind of sense of trees from the biblical point of view. Another scholar, Arthur Walker Jones, who is well known for green psalmody, so he studies psalms and looking at from the ecological point of view. He realized that in the psalms, so many psalms, that trees are prominent as well. It's like a tree planted by the stream of water. That's one of my favorite texts. Just imagine the tree and the stream. And being righteousness, or being righteous is in that. In Psalm 80, Israel is compared to a cedar of God. Again, tree metaphor. 92, righteous person is like a palm tree, like a cedar in Lebanon. 96, palmness looks forward to a time when the trees of the forest shall shout for joy. You all know that one. 148, at the end of the psalm, that fruit trees and all cedars will praise God. So this is a metaphor, but it could be also matter. That's what Gail Lamshaw is talking about. And we talked about that trees are not just in Christian or Judeo-Christian tradition, is in other cultures. And so I'm going to share another Korean/Chinese lesson to you. Like yesterday, I told you about Sum, right? And this one is more Chinese character. So the one on the left is a human. And I was sharing with some of our group talk when Christopher talking about the neighbor. So the in is like a person leading one to one another. So in other words, you cannot be human unless you are with somebody else. The sense of interdependence, sense of real vulnerability and humility that I need you in order to be who I am, right? So that's in. But then the tree looks like tree, isn't it? But the beauty of this letter is that together is the rest. So when humans are with trees, they are able to rest. And they are at peace. As in Hugh, it's not just rest, it's sense of shalom, sense of kind of peace with God, and so on. The life and the death of Jesus, the tree was central. Witnessing the cross in this way, the followers of Jesus connected the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus and the healing of the world to a tree. Yet, even with these powerful symbols in the Jewish and Christian scriptures, trees are not being fully present in worship and the life of the church. Maybe exception with your chapel here. So liturgical theologian Ben Stewart make a very critical note by saying that the tree, despite its roots in the earth and its nearly ubiquitous presence in human civilization, remains mostly as an idea in worship rather than embodied physical, material kind of presence. In Christian worship, the tree of life is largely unmaterialized and far detached from our senses. This is especially troubling, Stewart continues, when we consider the cross of Christ seriously. He claims that theology of the cross is kept at a distance from meaningful physical engagement with trees. And Ramshaw agrees with Stewart and reminds the readers of the gospel story that point to the cross beam on the pole stuck onto the Golgotha's hill. God is experienced in this blood flowing from the world's misery and injustice. The Christian hope comes out of the tree of death that can be the tree of life, a tree that knows death and grants life. Such a tree can be Christ on the cross and the creator of the universe, all in one. The neglect of the tree that is connected to the symbol of the death of Jesus has an extra poignancy in the history of the American church. James Cone makes a visceral connection between the cross of Jesus and the lynching tree, a violent, racist symbol. It's more than a symbol, right? It actually physically committed huge crime that white Christians need to wrestle with. Cone criticizes many white clergy and academics have failed to make a connection between the crucifixion of Jesus and the black experience of lynching in the United States. He further criticized the white church for actively participating in the lynching of black people throughout the 19th and 20th century. Maybe it's continuing in a different forms of violence. You know way better than me. Indeed, the lynching tree and its connection to be the cross of Jesus might effectively be taken up by any preacher if you seek to address the ongoing problem of racism in the world today and how that is connected with the ecological issues. So not only Christ's death is deeply connected to the tree of life, but his life on earth as an ordinary person of Jesus is also connected with the trees, as he was a carpenter working with wood that comes out of the trees. He grew up among trees in his father Joseph's carpentry and told carpentry jokes about dust and 2x4s in people's eyes. Do you remember that reference? That's a professional carpentry language. It is not a coincidence that he used seeds, trees, branches, and vines in his parables. Yeah? When he was born, the Magi, the wise from the east, brought 3 gifts. 2 of them are produced from trees. Speaking of Jesus' earthly and tree ministry, Jesus called Nathanael from a tree. We also know Zacchaeus, who met Jesus, where? When he climbed up a sycamore tree to encounter Jesus. The preaching on the tree of life means that we identify with tree as our earthkin and have empathy with them and get inspired by them. Those identification, this is sort of practical skills that some of you asked yesterday lecture. So I'm going to suggest kind of 4, and it's all interconnected, and you don't have to use everything at all sermons, but think about identification. You identify with this case tree, and then have empathy with the tree, what they are feeling, what are they saying, what are you hearing? Right? This is kind of sensory and very embodied. Not just heady, but kind of hard talk. And then, of course, gratitude to God in creation. No matter how harsh the life is, there are abundant gifts still to give thanks to one another, to God, the ones that are still called us to serve and lead. And then finally, evangelization. I think we can switch. This is not a linear order, as you can imagine. I could say as a circle, right? So in order to really engage ecological preaching and engage in climate crisis, really need to imagination. And I talked about it yesterday. So one of the really well-known preacher, Otis Moss III, talked about in one of his sermons that our greatest challenge in this world today is not that we lack the resources, not that we lack the funding, we lack the imagination to imagine a new world. And I totally agree with that. So the work of imagination for preaching ecologically is critical when we actually cannot see the earth or hear their voices or understand their languages. So it is imperative, essential, to tap into our capacity to see beyond our immediate sight and hear their voices beyond our capacity to hear the trees and other earthkin. In this sense, imagination is not the same as daydreaming or fantasy. Imagination is not a solitary act either, especially when we talk about preaching imagination for the reign of God. We need to imagine a new world together. And we talked about that yesterday, right? With your young people in your congregations, scientists, ecological activists. I mean, there are so many partners that we want to work together. Imagination is a communal practice. For we need to learn it together as we work at it, exercise it, and to get in the habit of using it, living by it, seeing through it every day. Okay, final H. Hesed. So I had to study hard about this because I'm not a Hebrew Bible scholar. And this very term, Hesed, is a Hebrew word. The most kind of significant or substantial work undertaken by Kathleen Dobbs Zackenfeld. And according to Zackenfeld, Hesed refers to the sovereign freedom of God and God's strong commitment to God's people. Both freedom of God and commitment of God are held together in this single word, Hesed. Hesed expressed the utter dependence of the people upon God. Okay? People are in dire situation. They have no other place to or entity to turn to other than God. And God's willingness and power to deliver them or help that situation. Hesed communicates the promised faithfulness of God upon which the people can base their cry for help. It also conveys the surprising faithfulness of God, which transcends even God's own declaration of judgment upon God's people in accordance with God's own commitment to people. So Hesed is a sure and everlasting work of God beyond any human expectation. So Zackenfeld, who passed away, and this book was this is 76 or something like that, really, really kind of old. But then New Testament scholar kind of picked up on it, and her name is Karen Nelson. And her job was how this very concept in Hesed throughout the Hebrew Bible is featuring in the New Testament. It's a very book, Hesed and the New Testament, in 2023, so it's pretty recent work. And taking a kind of intertextual approach, she examines how New Testament authors appropriate texts that evoke Hesed. And Nelson examines especially, guess what? Which one? The parable of the Good Samaritan that Christopher mentioned, and I'm going to elaborate furthermore to showcase how the meaning of Hesed can be found in the New Testament. She sheds light on the Samaritan who participate in the compassion that represents the covenantal faithfulness of God who sees and responds with salvific care. What the Samaritan showed and did captured the meaning of Hesed. This concept of Hesed is a kernel of wisdom that is helpful for us as we face the threats against planet Earth today. Truly, the problems of global warming and environmental destruction are massive and troubling, right? And it's so massive and troubling, we all feel like overwhelmed, right? And discouraged, and many of us also feeling like despair and powerlessness, like, what can I do? This is just too big a deal. And that's why children and many young people are experiencing a new form of existential kind of ontological angst dubbed climate anxiety. So there are many scholars who are, not just theologians, but psychologists and sociologists. They are working on this climate anxiety in children and young people. We need to pay attention to this when you think about the impact of climate crisis for our younger and next generations. So those who are most severely impacted by climate crisis pose just related question, rightly point fingers of judgment to the others who create its cause largely, right? So as Christian scholars and preachers, parents of our children and grandchildren, we ask, what are we to do? What can we help guide our people into a faithful response that avoids, that does not shrink responsibility or give in to despair? So grappling these very pressing, heavy, charged questions, what we find guidance is God's Hesed, this very deep, profound concept and teaching that no matter what, God holds us firmly in love while also demanding our faithful responsibility and action. So each of 5 lenses that we talked about as a homiletical strategy can address this crisis. And the Hesed as an ongoing, everlasting God's presence and help, and ongoing, everlasting response to God's Hesed for us. So it's kind of double binding. So despite the arduous journey ahead, God's covenant with God's people, with humanity and all creatures, and indeed the entire cosmos, hold us fast. Hesed is a form of love that is able to transcend sin. However, God's Hesed is not same as cheap grace. God's Hesed holds us accountable. It is double binding. It is a covenant that we need to do our part. So there is no getting out of our obligation addressing environmental crisis as God's beloved. Neither is there any escape from God's love. We are therefore compelled to preach, act, and renew our covenant with God and the world, both from a solemn acknowledgement of our shortcomings, but also from a joyful, gracious embrace of God's promise that God will not abandon us to our fate. That is the message we want to preach. So, kind of final section I want to talk about is exegesis of the parable of the Good Samaritan. So it's really great that you heard how Christopher engaged the Good Samaritan parable in light of the current situation, the othering situation, and so on and so forth. But how do we actually read this very well-known, one of the most beloved parables, be read and interpreted and preached from an ecological point of view? Kind of incorporating those 5 lenses: elements of life, animals in the Bible, rhythms of life, tree of life, and Hesed. You can do like each lens in a sermon, right? You can talk about elements in one sermon and the next day, so on. You can create a series of sermons, and we talk about some of those ideas. Leah Shade talked about 3 sermons in her book, The Creation Crisis Preaching, and in there, he actually featured 3 elements of life: earth, as in soil, water, and wind. And so it's called a trilogy of creation Christ sermons. So if you want to check it out, how she did it. Again, she did this before my time, and I didn't kind of adopted her work for this work, but there was kind of synergy, resonation. There are many different ways also doing for animals, as I talked about, or trees. There are so many trees in the Bible, different trees. And you can learn about that tree and symbolize different meaning, right? Cedar is like throne and sovereignty of God, whereas mustard seed trees are so tiny and yet doing a mighty work, right? So there are different ways of doing it. Kim Long, who is a practical theologian or pastor, a theologian, talking about praying with the tree of life in that book, Divine Mystery. And Ben Stewart, I already talked about a fragile tree of life, and he talks about especially the dead tree as a symbol of our death, the end of life, even the burial, like a funeral, and how instead of cremation and other ways of being buried, where the tree as an alternative way of doing it. So there's interesting practical, pastoral, liturgical kind of implications of how you can incorporate the tree of life in your sermon and your ministry. So, as I said, the parable of the Good Samaritan is one of the most beloved parables of Jesus. Most preachers have used this text to show, right, God is at work. Yet, maybe you may not heard this parable from an ecological lens. Have you? No. It's very focused on either Samaritan or any other human characters in the story. And they're all good, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But it would be kind of fun to think about this ecological lens and then how this parable might be undertaken from a kind of ecological material reality. So here is my attempt. Samaritan healed the wounded. But this healing involved more than his individual action. Healing of the wounded required the help of the earth community. In other words, the whole earth had a role to play in this story and participated in the actions of the Samaritan who demonstrated God's Hesed. Think about it. The Samaritan used oil and wine, both of which came from the tree of life. He was riding on a donkey, who took the wounded person to an inn. And there was this innkeeper, another stranger, another helper. And the very inn, that space, is made out of the earthly things. The parable's lesson is not just about a heroic solo act of the Samaritan, but points to a communal and interdependent ecological act. What is love in this story when we are told to love your neighbor as yourself? Conversely, when does this neighborly love look like? The earth, its soils, seas, atmosphere, places, plants, and other animals acted love as neighbors in this parable. the parable of the Good Samaritan calls for a triple actionable mandate of love: to heal the wounded, to save your life, and to treat your enemies as your neighbor. God is love, and creation itself is an embodied act of love. God, humans, and creation are all showcased in this parable. Neighborly love is shown as divine visitation, where both hospitality and justice together characterized hesed. The act of the Samaritan in Luke is more than an expression of compassion. It is also a demonstration of hesed, kind of double binding, right, as a basis for neighborly love in action. So, who is my neighbor? This is a question that drives the parable. But the awkward literal translation, according to Karen Nelson, and here is what I want to show you, says, "Es hopoieses to eleos met autou as the one which showed him mercy." And according to her, this fails to capture the idea of hesed that we have explored above. Rather, the translation such as "the one who dealt faithfully with" seems to be a better job. Yeah, interesting taking on. The Samaritan's healing action of hesed, featured in this parable, is the culmination of our earth preaching project. The parable calls for an earth community of material agency, the agency of care, love, compassion, and the agency of breaking of unjust barriers and the prejudices against one another. The material elements of life, the hot sun, and the hard soil of the path form a frame for the tale. Oil and wine, the gifts of tree are important to the healing story. The cloth bandage material that he used to put that on the wound, another gift from the plant, is essential. An animal bore the wounded. The rhythms of travel and rest, of strength and of weakness are present in this story. All of these were necessary for enabling the Samaritan to perform the act of divine hesed and assist God's healing. From the inhospitable habitat of the place surrounding the road to the hospitable inn, the Samaritan performed his obligation of neighborly love. By doing so, he exemplified divine hesed in partnership with the earth community. And in our ecological preaching for the planet and in our living, we are called to do likewise. So, yesterday and today, I hope I given you something to think about and some memomatic kind of memorable tool for organizing our thoughts using the very acronym EARTH in order to really engage seriously and sustainably and persistently tackle our climate crisis by centering Earth beyond human-centered. It is my prayer to you that using these lenses, you come away encouraged rather than discouraged to address the climate crisis and empowered to empower your people and your communities and do the work that God is calling us to do. And God is with us in that. Thank you very much. So I know we have some time. So from yesterday's evening or afternoon conversation, we could do a little small group maybe 3 here, 3 over there, 4 there, and maybe online if there's a online group, what is resonating with you? What are the things that you might want to try, maybe, or share something that you've been doing that is so like resonating with what I offered, or things that I have not thought about it, but maybe I'll try. Maybe a couple of those, and maybe share that. Maybe 10 minutes, and we'll kind of collect those gifts from your wisdom. Sounds okay? Yeah, yeah. And what are the things that you want to try, something new? Maybe 2 questions rather than. But you don't have to do both if you don't have time. But what resonated, or what are the things that you want to try? 10 minutes? Maybe 2 more minutes? So I want to invite everybody back. And 2 mics are here, and there'll be online folks that Richard hopefully can read to us. Yeah, share what you discussed, and anything that would be good offering for all of us to share.
I shared with the group that we cover up the word, I don't know, whitewash it or something. We say donkey, but I heard a person preach and called him an ass.
Oh.
And he himself, gets insulted like that. And he took it on because God spoke through an ass. And amazingly at a gathering family like Thanksgiving or whatever, my mother called me an ass, and I wanted to get angry, but God had talked through an ass. So
yeah, that's great.
So I left it alone. It hurt my brother more than said, why didn't you say anything? Years later. And God, the person you insult.
Yeah.
So that ass that you think it.
Yeah, I think, thank you. Yeah, so the person that was insulted, but then the animal was insulted too. But then you redeem that presence in some ways, right? Owning it and then spinning it positively. That's what we do. And power word. Thank you.
I appreciated walking through the Good Samaritan story, identifying the different earth elements, and I made a note to myself that'll be helpful in sermon preparation, even if I'm not focusing ecologically, just to take a moment to appreciate and identify all of the earth elements in a story. I think that'll be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, thank you so much.
I've got a 38-point critique. No, I'm just
okay. Go for it. No, 38. No, I'm writing.
No, I think what you've called me to in thinking about this is to try to find a way to be heard rather than a way to kind of articulate everything that's going on. I mean, my students know me for being gentle and careful and never saying. So, but how do you invite congregations to think about this in a time where the crisis is elevating more higher every day? Yeah. It's even worse.
It is worse. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, gentle nudge. The crisis is so overwhelming, and it can be polarizing, as I said earlier in the sermon, right? And so gentle but nudge and persistent, just like what water and what trees are doing to us, right? That would be great. Thank you.
Anyone who's heard me preach knows that my favorite phrase is, well, what this really says in the Greek is. And so as we were talking through the Good Samaritan, Nelson's retranslation really stuck out to me. As reframing the Samaritan's actions, we look at the Samaritan as enacting charity toward exercising a power over, whereas this translation of the one who dealt faithfully with places the Samaritan in a position of solidarity.
Yes.
And kind of follows Levinas's model of obligation to the other.
Yes.
Which I think is an important point for us to capture.
Excellent.
Especially when we think ecologically,
Yeah.
we share that obligation to
Yeah.
more than human.
Exactly. Thank you very much. I think the really important term hesed and obligation. And, I talked to some of other members during the discussion that so-called the scripture tradition, especially those who are the other, the orphan, the widow, the poor, the stranger, right? Meaning Gentiles. How many times they are identified? And they are literally are marginalized, but also you could include them as a part of earth communities as well. And it's not about, it's a pity, right? The charity that I have all the means and I have power over, right? Patronizing, tokenizing. No, it's an obligation. If you are God's people and God called you, remember you were slaves. Remember you were in a foreign land. And I'm the one who delivered so that you can create a world that all can belong and no one is behind, right? And so that no one includes earth. And so I think that translation is really important and excellent. Again, this is kind of power of word that you can do. There are other things we can do and should do, but in terms of the preaching and biblical, seriously reading the scripture in such a way, faithfully and carefully and critically, and there is a liberating power within, and you are called to proclaim and share as good news. So thank you for that. Any other group to share? Don't be shy. Thank you.
So I haven't really formed a question with this yet.
It's okay.
But I guess like one of the things that I've been thinking about with this is compassion fatigue. And I'm also, I'm part of older Gen Z. I'm also a youth director.
I see.
And so like we brought up today, like how younger people are really feeling that climate
Yes.
anxiety. We know a lot of our leaders in the church are starting to be young people. And so
That's
I guess, like holding those things in tension. Like I said, I don't have a question yet, but that's some of what I've been thinking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a great, not as in great as good, but important, important term to think about and wrestle with, compassion fatigue. And during the COVID, the things that I learned a lot from health workers, both nurses and doctors, and actually working in the hospital, like cleaners and custodians and so on and so forth, they have a kind of moral injury, right? And they see this person sick, that person sick, but we just have that much limit of resources and time, and they have to let that person die and go into, so that sense of decision, and that's just so hard. And not only that physically they are so tired, but that kind of moral injury. So I think compassion fatigue is similar, right? We do, but there's so much more. And which one? At some point we have to discern to let something go, and that's so hard, and right? But I really also appreciate those preachers and pastors and church leaders becoming younger, which is really good news. But then they have to hold both of their own and still be the leader for the community. Yeah, identity crisis a little bit, right? But hopefully you are not alone, that you have people to rely on. Remember the lean on, and those who are not Gen Z, older in age, I think we have a lot more obligations to do for our next generations. One more, and then we can.
We have someone online.
Okay, wonderful, Richard.
Steve said, the church I attend is blessed with a beautiful outdoor chapel in a wooded setting. We have a service there every Sunday morning in the summer months.
Wow.
We can do more to incorporate the ideas about the trees, plants, birds, and sometimes deer that visit during worship into our worship and preaching.
Aw.
We also have a memorial garden just behind the chapel, so the whole circle of life and death is physically present there with us also. The ideas presented here can be used to emphasize the interconnectedness we have with all of creation more than we have previously done.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Yeah. So as I told you when I got here last night or 2 nights ago, the first thing I did was Robin greeting to me, but then I was walking around and I saw the outdoor chapel here as well. And if you are in your community able to worship outside and just walk and talk. So again, you need imagination is a part of creativity, and the best way to be creative is actually asking the creation to help you to be creative. It's the same word, the creator God that is created and creative, creating. It's just all from the creation as well. We need creation to help us to be artistic and creative. So literally walk and talk kind of service and using those 4 elements of life into your worship more intentionally and more regularly, just like I often tell my students, like brushing your teeth, to the point that you remember, not even thinking, you just do it, because it's almost in your body. Body remembers, and you just do it. If we can sustain and practice that way, then it will be so much more powerful. So thank you so much, and indeed, you know, material reality is amazing, and so we just have to get out. And there's then different ways of preaching, right? Because the birds will be louder than you speak during the sermon, which is great, right? Then you can have fun and sense of humor and humility, and much more engaged kind of preaching rather than one person talk, right? So the participatory kind of sermons can be also created. So there's much more exciting and innovative, sustaining kind of work of the preaching life that you might create with your people and Earth community. I think that would be great. Thank you so much. Thank you.